Welcome back. In this section, you're going to learn about the federal actions and federal laws leading up to the enactment of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966. You'll recall that initially private sector activities tended to revolve around important historic figures and landmark structures. During the 18th and 19th century, people that were doing what you might call preservation work were genealogists, historians, conservationists, and a few associations and societies. There were also early regional efforts to save buildings, like Independence Hall in Philadelphia. In 1816, it was going to be condemned, knocked down, and the property that it sat on was going to be subdivided into smaller parcels. But the city of Philadelphia intervened and purchased the building for preservation. There were also a lot of historical societies that were dedicated to preserving the American frontier. And of course, there was Anne Pamela Cunningham and the Mount Vernon's Ladies Association. These private efforts were about great monuments and history and patriotism, not about architecture or the interests of everyday citizens. In the federal realm around this same period of time, the government turned its focus towards natural sites and natural resources. It was interested in protecting national forests and what it considered to be natural history, which at the time also meant everything related to American Indians. And by the late 19th century, we had national parks like Yellowstone. But before we get into this, let's go back again to England in 1826 to talk about the handsome James Smithson, a British chemist and mineralogist, and illegitimate son of the first Duke of Northumberland. He drew up his will naming his nephew as beneficiary, but if his nephew died without any heirs, the entire estate was to go to the United States of America to found the Smithsonian Institution, which he said was an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. People really aren't sure why he made these arrangements. He had never been to the United States and didn't seem to have correspondence with anyone here. It has been suggested that he was motivated by revenge against British society. As an illegitimate child, he was kept out of British society. But a far less Downton Abbey-esque reason was that it reflected his interests in the Enlightenment ideal of universal education. Regardless of which one is true, when he died in 1829, his fortune went to the United States, where Congress in its wisdom, reminiscent of today's politics, sat on the money for 8 years until there was finally an order creating the Smithsonian. This became the nation's repository for the spoils of exploration. In 1849, the Department of the Interior was established, and this is significant because the Department of the Interior is the umbrella under which nearly everything preservation-related falls. Although a lot of what was originally under the purview of Interior has changed. Land and natural resource management, Native American affairs, wildlife conservation, and territorial affairs remain the responsibility of the Department of Interior. With the Civil War starting in 1861 and lasting through 1865, there's not a lot by the way of preservation that happened during that period. But the battlefields from the war come to be the subjects of the first historic preservation-related litigation. Yellowstone became America's first national park in 1872. On March 1, 1872, President Grant signed the Act of Declaration law that established it as the first national park. Take a few minutes to read the Act of Dedication for Yellowstone that was approved in March 1st. You'll see from the language that the intent was in part to preserve the area for the benefit and enjoyment of the people, but it was also intended to keep people from settling on the land, overusing natural resources located there, and looting artifacts.